The August heat of 1844 pressed down on the Brazos Valley like an iron skillet left too long on the fire. Isaiah's hands, scarred from years at the forge, gripped the rusted chains connecting him to 49 other souls. The metal bit into his wrists with a familiar cruelty, a sensation he'd known since childhood but never accepted. The caravan had been moving for 6 days now, from the cotton fields of East Texas toward the sugar death camps of Louisiana. Isaiah knew what waited there. He'd heard the stories whispered in slave quarters late at night. Men worked to bone in the cane fields, their bodies giving out before their 30th year. Women disappeared into the big houses, emerging hollow-eyed and pregnant with children who'd be sold before they learned to walk. But that wasn't what occupied Isaiah's mind as the sun began its descent toward the western horizon. He'd been counting the landscape, recognizing signs his grandfather had taught him before the old man's back finally broke under the overseer's whip. They'd crossed into Comanche territory 2 days ago, and every mile took them deeper. The lead overseer, a thick-necked man named Clayton, who smelled perpetually of whiskey and violence, didn't seem to notice. Or perhaps he didn't care. What are you thinking about this story? Your opinion is incredibly important to us. Please subscribe, leave a comment sharing your thoughts, and let us know if you're enjoying this tale. We truly value your feedback. It helps us create better content for you. White men like Clayton believed their guns, and their God made them invincible on any land they chose to claim. Isaiah knew better. "Water!" croaked the woman chained beside him. Her name was Ruth, and she'd been torn from her 3 children back in Harrison County. The grief had carved deep lines into her face, aging her a decade in a single week. "Ain't no water till nightfall," barked one of the armed riders, a young man barely 20 with eyes that had already learned to see enslaved people as something less than human. Ruth's lips were cracked and bleeding. Isaiah shifted slightly, angling his body to provide her a few inches of shade. It wasn't much, but it was all he could offer, with chains binding his every movement. The landscape had changed over the past hours. The scrubby grasslands gave way to rolling hills, dotted with mesquite and live oak. In the distance, limestone cliffs caught the failing light, turning the color of dried blood. Isaiah's grandfather had described this place, the heart of Comanche, where the lords of the southern plains had ruled for generations before the Republic of Texas declared their sovereignty over lands they'd never truly controlled. As twilight approached, Clayton finally called for camp. The enslaved were herded into a tight circle and chained to a central post driven deep into the earth. No food was distributed. The overseers believed hungry captives were compliant captives. They were wrong, but their arrogance was a comfort Isaiah had learned to rely on. The overseers built their fire 20 yards away, close enough to watch their human cargo, but far enough to avoid the smell of 50 unwashed bodies pressed together in the summer heat. They passed a bottle of whiskey, their laughter carrying across the evening air like the cawing of crows. Isaiah closed his eyes and listened. Not to the overseers, but to the land itself. The night birds were silent. That meant something. An hour passed, then 2. The moon rose full and rust-colored, hanging low over the horizon like a watching eye. The overseers' fire burned down to embers, and one by one they settled into sleep, confident in their guns and their chains. That's when Isaiah heard it, the soft whisper of movement in the darkness beyond the firelight. Not animal, human, but moving with a grace that white men had forgotten in their heavy boots and heavier presumptions. "Don't move," he whispered to Ruth and the others nearby. "Don't make a sound." The first overseer died without waking, a Comanche warrior's knife opening his throat with surgical precision. The second managed half a scream before an arrow punched through his chest, pinning him to the earth like a message. Clayton woke fast, reaching for his rifle, but a lance took him through the shoulder, driving him back against a wagon wheel. He screamed, a high animal sound of pain and terror that should have brought Isaiah satisfaction, but instead just felt tired. Within minutes, it was over. 6 overseers dead or dying, and the night belonged to the Comanche. 15 warriors materialized from the darkness, painted for war, their faces unreadable in the moonlight. At their center stood a man who could only be a chief. His bearing spoke of authority earned through combat and counsel, not inherited through blood. The chained captives froze, uncertain whether they'd been saved or simply claimed by new masters. Isaiah knew this moment would determine everything. He forced himself to his feet despite the chains, ignoring the burning in his wrists. Drawing on memories of his grandfather's teachings, he spoke in broken Comanche, the language of trade and treaty his ancestor had learned decades ago. "Great warriors," he began, his voice rough but clear. "We are not your enemies. We are the enemies of your enemies." The chief stepped forward, studying Isaiah with dark eyes that missed nothing. When he spoke, his voice carried the weight of mountains. "You speak our tongue poorly, blacksmith, but you speak it. Why? My grandfather knew your people, traded with them, learned from them. He taught me your language is one of honor, not like the forked tongue of these men." Isaiah gestured toward the dead overseers. "And yet you wear their chains." "Not by choice, great chief, never by choice." The chief walked slowly around the circle of captives, examining faces, noting the scars and brands that marked bodies like maps of suffering. When he returned to Isaiah, his expression had shifted, not to sympathy exactly, but to recognition. "I am Tahanako," the chief said. "These men crossed our lands like they own the earth itself. They take and take and take, and when we resist, they call us savages. Tell me, blacksmith, what are these chains? What are these marks on your people's skin?" Isaiah met his gaze directly, knowing that respect among the Comanche was earned through truth and courage, not deference. "These chains are what they use to steal our lives. They take us from our families, from our lands. They work us until we break, and when we break, they buy new people to break. The marks," he touched the brand on his shoulder, a T burned deep into his flesh years ago. "These are so we can't run, so they can find us, so they can prove we're property, not people." "Property," Tahanako repeated the word like it tasted foul. "Like a horse, like a weapon, like nothing that lives and breathes and loves should ever be." Tahanako was silent for a long moment. Around him his warriors waited, trusting their chief's judgment. Finally, he spoke again. "We have heard stories of your people. The army told us you are happy in your bondage, that you love your masters like children love fathers. They said you would fight beside them against us." A bitter laugh escaped Isaiah's throat before he could stop it. "They lied. Everything they tell you about us is a lie. We are not happy. We are not loved. We are beaten, raped, murdered, and sold. Our children are torn from our arms and shipped like cotton bales. There is no bondage we accept, no master we love. There is only survival, and the hope that one day we might see our chains broken." Ruth spoke up then, her voice cracking but strong. "They took my babies, 3 little ones, sold them down the river to pay a gambling debt. When I cried, the master's wife said I should be grateful, said I was too old to raise them proper anyway, said I should thank God they'd have good Christian homes." Other voices joined hers, a chorus of testimonies about children sold, husbands whipped to death for looking at a white woman, daughters vanished into the master's house and returned pregnant and broken. Old men worked until their bodies simply gave out and were buried in unmarked graves beyond the fields. Tahanako listened to all of it, his face carved from stone. When the voices finally fell silent, he turned to his warriors and spoke in rapid Comanche. They responded with gestures and words Isaiah couldn't quite follow, but he understood the tone. They were making a decision about what to do with 50 chained captives and the bloody evidence of a caravan ambush. Finally, Tahanako turned back to Isaiah. "If the white men make war against your blood," he said slowly, "then your war is ours." The words hung in the night air like a promise and a threat combined. Isaiah felt something shift in his chest, not quite hope, because hope was dangerous, but something close to it. "You would help us?" "Help?" Tahanako shook his head. "No, blacksmith, we would fight beside you. There is a difference. We do not help the weak. We stand with warriors who resist oppression. Your people resist, yes, every day, in every way we can without dying. But the chains—" Tahanako drew a knife and approached Isaiah. For a heartbeat, Isaiah thought death had finally come. Instead, the chief knelt and began working at the lock on Isaiah's shackles. It took 3 minutes of careful manipulation before the mechanism clicked open. "Your chains are metal," Tahanako said as Isaiah's bonds fell away. "Ours are different, but just as real. The white men take our land and call it destiny. They kill our buffalo and call it progress. They sign treaties and break them before the ink dries, then call us faithless when we fight back. Perhaps it is time for those who wear different chains to break them together." As Tahanako's warriors moved through the group, freeing each captive in turn, Isaiah rubbed his wrists and tried to process what was happening. Around him, 50 people were experiencing their first moments of freedom, some crying, some laughing, some simply standing in stunned silence. But Isaiah's mind was already racing ahead. Freedom meant nothing if they were captured again tomorrow. And the plantations that had purchased them would send hunters, men with dogs and guns, who tracked runaways for profit and pleasure. "Great chief," Isaiah said, "there are 5 plantations within 3 days' ride of here. Rich men who own hundreds of my people. Men who will send armies to recapture us and punish you for this act. We cannot simply walk away and hope they forget." Tahanako's smile was sharp as his knife. "Who said anything about walking away?" The Comanche camp lay hidden in a canyon 3 hours' ride from where the caravan had met its end. Isaiah had never seen anything like it. Dozens of lodges arranged in careful order, horses grazing in natural corrals formed by rock walls, children playing games that tested skills they'd need as warriors and survivors. This wasn't the savage wilderness camp the plantation owners described in their fearful stories. This was a community, organized and purposeful. Tahanako led Isaiah, Ruth, and 5 others who'd emerged as natural leaders among the freed captives to his lodge. Inside, a fire burned low, casting dancing shadows on painted hides that told stories of battles and hunts. An older woman, Tahanako's wife, Isaiah learned, served them water and pemmican, the dried meat and berry mixture that sustained Comanche warriors on long raids. "Eat," Tahanako commanded. "We talk better on full stomachs." Isaiah hadn't eaten in 2 days. The pemmican tasted like salvation itself. Around him, his companions devoured their portions with the desperate efficiency of people who never knew when food might come again. When they'd finished, Tahanako spread a hide on the ground. Using pieces of charcoal, he began drawing a crude map, the Brazos River curving through the valley, 5 marks representing the plantations Isaiah had mentioned. "Tell me about these places," Tahanako said. "How many men with guns? How many of your people? Where do they keep weapons? Where do the masters sleep?" Isaiah leaned forward, studying the map. His grandfather had taught him to read and write in secret, a crime that would have cost him his tongue if discovered. Now that forbidden knowledge became invaluable. "The closest is the Morrison place," Isaiah began, pointing to the northernmost mark. "Maybe 40 slaves, mostly field hands. 6 white men, Morrison, his 2 sons, and 3 overseers. They keep rifles in the main house, locked in Morrison's study. The slave quarters are a 1/4 mile from the big house, past the cotton gin." Ruth spoke up. "Morrison's wife died last year. He's been drinking heavy since. The overseers run things now, and they're mean, real mean. Girl named Sarah tried to run 2 months back. They caught her before she made 5 miles. Morrison had them whip her in front of everybody, then sold her baby to a trader from Alabama just to teach a lesson." Tahanako's jaw tightened. And the others, one by one, they detailed the remaining plantations. The Bridger estate, largest of the five, with nearly 200 enslaved people and a dozen armed overseers. The Colton place, smaller but vicious. Colton had a reputation for using his female slaves and then selling off the light-skinned children they bore. The Hendricks brothers' adjoining properties run like military camps with strict discipline and systematic brutality. As they spoke, other Comanche warriors entered the lodge, clearly Tahanako's counsel. They listened in silence, their faces revealing nothing, but Isaiah could sense the growing anger in the room. These were men who understood oppression, who'd watched their own people slaughtered and displaced by the same forces that had enslaved Isaiah's. When the descriptions finished, an older warrior with a scar bisecting his face spoke in Comanche. Tahanako translated, "Red Hawk asks why your people don't rise up. If you are so many and they are so few, why do you accept chains?" It was a question Isaiah had asked himself 1,000 times. He took a breath, searching for words that would make sense to men who valued courage above all else. "Fear," he said simply, "but not the fear you might think. Yes, they have guns and we have hoes and hammers. Yes, they have laws that say killing a slave is just property damage, not murder. But the real fear, it's what happens to those you love. A man might face death for himself. Many of us would. But when they threaten to sell your wife, to whip your children, to burn the only community you've ever known, that's a different calculation." He paused, making sure Tahanako translated accurately. On the Morrison place, a man named Jacob tried to organize a rebellion 3 years ago. They discovered it the night before. Morrison didn't kill Jacob, that would have been mercy. He sold Jacob's wife and 4 children to 4 different buyers. Jacob watched them loaded onto 4 different wagons, going 4 different directions. Then Morrison kept Jacob alive, working him in sight of the empty cabin where his family used to sleep. That's the fear that keeps chains strong. Red Hawk grunted, nodding slowly. Another warrior spoke, younger, with fierce eyes and fresh scars on his arms. "Swift Arrow says this makes you wise, not cowards," Tahanako translated. "He says the white men are clever in their cruelty, but he also says, and I agree, that fear is a weapon that can be turned against those who wield it." "What do you mean?" Isaiah asked. Tahanako leaned back, firelight playing across his features. "You fear for your families. The plantation owners fear losing their property, their wealth, their control. But there is something they fear more than anything. They fear you rising up together. They fear the day when the risk of rebellion becomes less than the certainty of continued suffering. Most of all, they fear you finding allies they cannot control or predict." Understanding dawned in Isaiah's mind. "You want to hit all 5 plantations at once. Not just hit, destroy. Completely. So thoroughly that every plantation owner in Texas wakes up the next morning knowing their world has changed forever." Ruth shook her head, fear and hope warring in her expression. "You're talking about war, real war. They'll send the army. They'll hunt us all down." "The army is already hunting us," Tahanako replied. "The Republic of Texas wants us gone, our lands empty, so they can fill them with their cotton and their cattle. They send soldiers. We kill soldiers. They send more. This has been happening since before you were born. What changes if we kill plantation owners instead of just soldiers?" "Everything," Isaiah said quietly. "If we do this, it's not just a raid. It's a message. It tells every enslaved person in Texas that freedom is possible. It tells every master that their power isn't absolute. It changes the story they tell themselves about who we are." "Exactly," Tahanako smiled grimly. "We Comanche learned long ago. Stories are weapons. The Texans tell stories about savage Indians who attack without reason. These stories make other whites support sending armies against us. But if we attack those who enslave others, if we free captives and burn the houses of torturers, what story do they tell then?" Another warrior spoke, and Tahanako's expression grew serious. He translated, Black Bear asks an important question. If we do this, what happens to the freed captives afterward? We can hide 50 people in our camps for a time, but not 200, maybe not 500. If all these plantations empty, where do they go? The lodge fell silent. It was the question none of them had wanted to address, the difference between freedom and survival. Isaiah had thought about this during the long ride to the canyon. Mexico, he said. It's a hard journey, maybe 3 weeks on foot, but Mexico abolished slavery. If we can get people across the Rio Grande, they're legally free. The Mexican government won't send them back. 3 weeks through country crawling with Texas Rangers and slave hunters, Ruth said. How many children could make that journey? How many old folks? How many die slow in the fields? Isaiah counted, his voice harder than he intended. I'm not saying it's easy. I'm saying it's possible, and possible is more than we had yesterday. Tahanako stood, pacing the lodge. We would need to move fast, strike all 5 plantations in one night before word can spread, free everyone who wants to come, destroy everything that represents their power, then disappear before the Texas militia can organize. Can your warriors do this? Isaiah asked. 5 targets all at once? We are Comanche, Tahanako said, and there was pride but no arrogance in his voice. We can be in 5 places at once if needed. We've raided Spanish missions, Mexican ranchos, Texas settlements. We know how to strike hard and vanish like smoke. The question is, can your people fight? Isaiah looked at Ruth and the others. He saw the fear in their eyes, but also something else, something that had been beaten down but never quite extinguished. Anger, determination, the desperate courage of people with nothing left to lose. Give us weapons, he said. Show us what to do. We'll fight. Red Hawk spoke again, and this time his tone was approving. Tahanako smiled. Red Hawk says you have the heart of a warrior. He says if we do this thing, we do it as brothers, not as leaders and followers. The freed captives fight for their own freedom, not as tools of the Comanche. This is important. Do you understand? Isaiah understood perfectly. Tahanako was offering alliance, not rescue. Partnership, not salvation. The distinction mattered. It meant the freed slaves would have agency, would be participants in their own liberation, rather than passive recipients of someone else's charity. We understand, Isaiah said, and we accept. Over the next hour they planned. Tahanako's warriors knew the country intimately, every trail, every water source, every place where an army could be ambushed or evaded. They would split into 5 groups, each led by an experienced war chief, each accompanied by freed captives who knew the specific plantation they'd target. The attack would come in 5 nights, during the new moon when darkness would be their ally. Each group would approach their targets separately, coordinate their attacks to begin simultaneously at midnight and be gone before dawn broke. The freed captives would have those 5 days to prepare, to learn basic fighting, to practice riding the horses Tahanako's people would provide, to steel themselves for what was coming. Not everyone would fight in the actual raids. Children, the elderly, the sick would remain in the canyon under guard. But everyone of fighting age who wanted to participate would be given that chance. As the council broke up and people filed out of the lodge, Red Hawk approached Isaiah. Through Tahanako, he said, I lost my wife and son to Texas Rangers 5 winters ago. They raided our winter camp, killed anyone they found. My son was 7. He died trying to protect his mother with a stick. The old warrior's eyes glistened. I tell you this so you know. I understand what drives you. Vengeance is a legitimate prayer, but it is not enough. You must also have a plan for what comes after. Otherwise, you trade one death for another. Isaiah nodded slowly. What came after for you? I stopped asking why the gods allowed such suffering. I started asking what I could do to prevent it from happening again, not just to my people, but to anyone. That's why I support this raid. Not for revenge, though I will take that gladly, but because perhaps we can show that different peoples, enslaved Africans and free Comanche, can stand together against common oppression. Perhaps that is the real weapon that terrifies the Texans. After Red Hawk left, Isaiah found himself alone with Tahanako. The chief stirred the fire, sending sparks spiraling up through the smoke hole in the lodge's roof. "You're thinking this is insane," Tahanako said. It wasn't a question. "I'm thinking it's necessary," Isaiah replied, which might be the same thing. 5 days ago, I was chained in a caravan heading to my death. Now I'm planning to attack 5 plantations with Comanche warriors. If this isn't insane, I don't know what is. "My people have a saying," Tahanako said. "The bee and the buffalo seem to have nothing in common, but both can kill you if provoked. Sometimes survival requires unexpected alliances. And sometimes," Isaiah added, "it requires becoming something your enemies never expected. They see us as property, as animals. They're about to learn different." Tahanako gripped Isaiah's shoulder. "5 nights, blacksmith. We'll need every one of them. Your people need training, not just in weapons, but in thinking like free men and women. That might be the hardest part." Isaiah knew he was right. Slavery didn't just bind the body, it bound the mind, taught helplessness, punished initiative. Undoing that conditioning in 5 days seemed impossible, but then everything about this situation seemed impossible. He stepped out of the lodge into the night. Above, stars stretched in vast profusion across the Texas sky, the same stars that had watched over cotton fields and slave quarters and forced marches, the same stars that had seen generations of suffering. In 5 nights, those stars would witness something different. Isaiah just hoped he'd live to see them afterward. Across the canyon, someone was singing, an old work song from the fields, but with new words, words about freedom, words about fire. The other freed captives joined in, their voices rising into the darkness like a prayer and a promise combined. The brutal alliance had been born. Now it just had to survive long enough to strike. Dawn broke cold over the canyon, the sun painting the limestone walls in shades of amber and rust. Isaiah hadn't slept. He'd spent the night walking among the freed captives, listening to their fears and hopes, trying to gauge who would fight and who would simply survive. By his count, 37 of the 50 freed people were capable of participating in the raids. The others were too young, too old, or too broken by their years in bondage. 37 warriors, against 5 plantations holding hundreds of enslaved people and dozens of armed white men. The mathematics of survival had never looked worse. Tahanako appeared at first light, accompanied by Swift Arrow and a woman Isaiah hadn't met before. She was perhaps 40, with intelligent eyes and hands scarred from work. "This is Quichnai," Tahanako said, "medicine woman. She will teach your people about plants that heal and plants that kill. Both are useful." Quichnai spoke in heavily accented English. "Your people know white man's medicine, whipping scars, infection from chains, babies born in fields. I teach Comanche medicine, different philosophy. We believe body and spirit heal together or not at all." Over the next hour, she led a group of 15 women and 3 men, including Isaiah, on a walk through the canyon. She pointed out plants, explaining their properties. Some were obvious even to Isaiah's limited knowledge. Sage for purification, yucca roots for soap. Others were revelations. "This," Queen said, indicating a small purple flower, "makes men sleep deep. 1 flower in water, they sleep normal. 3 flowers, they sleep and dream strange. 5 flowers, they don't wake up." She looked directly at Isaiah. "Your people cook for masters, yes? Maybe masters eat wrong food sometimes." The implication was clear. The raids would be violent, but there were ways to reduce resistance before the violence began. Isaiah thought of the plantation houses, the meals prepared by enslaved cooks who'd spent decades perfecting dishes for people who owned them. How many of those cooks would welcome the chance to add special ingredients to their masters' dinners? While Queen taught herbal warfare, Swift Arrow gathered the able-bodied men and began weapons training. The Comanche provided lances, knives, and a few rifles taken from previous raids. But Swift Arrow focused first on improvised weapons, rocks, clubs, tools repurposed as instruments of liberation. "Gun is powerful," Swift Arrow said in broken English, "but gun makes noise, needs time to reload. Knife is silent, club is everywhere. You must think different. Everything is weapon if you use correct." He demonstrated on a practice target, a burlap sack stuffed with grass and hung from a tree branch. With a knife he showed killing strikes to the throat, under the ribs, behind the knee to cripple. With a club, he demonstrated how to swing not for the head, too risky, too protected, but for the knees, the elbows, the vulnerable joints. "You not trained warriors," Swift Arrow continued. "You don't try to be, you try to be unexpected. Masters expect you to run, to hide, to beg. They don't expect you to attack. This is your advantage. Use it before they adapt." A man named Thomas, built like an oak tree from years of hauling cotton bales, stepped forward. "What if we freeze? What if we get there and can't do it? I've been beaten for looking at a white man wrong. Now you want me to kill one?" Swift Arrow didn't dismiss the fear. Instead, he nodded. "Fear is good. Fear keeps you alive, but you must point fear at correct target. Are you afraid of dying? Of course, but are you more afraid of living in chains, of watching your children sold, of growing old in bondage? Decide which fear is stronger. Let that fear drive you." Thomas stood silent for a moment, then picked up a club. He swung it at the practice target with such force that the burlap ripped open, spilling grass across the ground. He stood there, breathing hard, staring at his hands as if seeing them for the first time. "I've wanted to do that for 20 years, he whispered. By midday, the training split into specialized groups. Red Hawk took 10 people with experience around horses and taught them Comanche riding techniques, how to mount and dismount at speed, how to fight from horseback, how to guide a horse with knees alone, leaving hands free for weapons. A warrior named Stone Knife worked with anyone who'd been a blacksmith, carpenter, or craftsman, showing them how to identify and destroy key infrastructure. "You want to hurt Plantation, you don't just kill masters," Stone Knife explained through a translator. "You burn cotton gin, you break plows, you poison wells, you make land useless so no one can rebuild." Isaiah found himself moving between groups, translating when needed, answering questions, and slowly becoming the de facto leader of the freed captives. He hadn't sought the role. It had simply emerged from necessity. People looked to him because he'd been the first to speak to Tahanako, because he'd helped plan the raids, because he projected a confidence he didn't entirely feel. Ruth approached him in the afternoon, her expression troubled. "Isaiah, we need to talk about the children." They walked away from the main group, finding privacy among a stand of cedar trees. Ruth's 3 children, the ones she'd been separated from, were somewhere in East Texas, sold to different buyers. Isaiah knew her pain wasn't unique. At least 20 of the freed captives had children they'd been separated from. "If we burn these 5 plantations," Ruth said, "we save maybe 500 people, but my babies aren't in those 500. Neither are most folks' lost children. What are we supposed to do? Just leave them?" It was the question that kept Isaiah awake at night. The brutal mathematics of liberation. They could save some, but not all. Not even close to all. Texas held thousands of enslaved people across hundreds of plantations. This raid would barely make a dent. "We save who we can," Isaiah said quietly. "We show it's possible. We prove that resistance works, and maybe, we inspire others to do the same. Your children, Ruth, I won't lie to you. I don't know if we can get them back. But I know if we don't do this, if we don't show that freedom is possible, then nobody's children have hope." Ruth's eyes filled with tears, but she didn't cry. She'd learned long ago that tears were a luxury slaves couldn't afford. "I know you're right. I hate that you're right, but I know it. I needed to hear someone say it out loud, that it's not about saving everyone, it's about proving everyone can be saved." That evening, Tahanako called another council. This time, all the freed captives who would participate in the raids were invited. The lodge was crowded, bodies pressed together, the air thick with sweat and tension. "Tomorrow we divide into 5 groups," Tahanako announced. "Each group attacks one plantation. Tonight, we finalize plans. Each of you will know your target, your role, your escape route." Questions? A young woman named Sarah, the same one Ruth had mentioned earlier, the one who'd been whipped and had her baby sold, raised her hand. "What about the other slaves on the plantations, the ones who won't come with us? What if they're too scared to run?" It was a critical question. Not everyone would choose freedom, especially not at first. Some were too traumatized, too beaten down. Others had families split across multiple plantations and wouldn't leave without everyone. Some simply couldn't imagine a life outside bondage. "We free them," Tahanako said simply. "We break their chains. We tell them where to find us if they choose. But we don't force. Freedom means choice. This is important principle." Red Hawk added something in Comanche, which Tahanako translated. "Red Hawk says some will tell masters what happened. Some will even help masters track us. This will happen. You must accept it. Freedom is not something everyone wants. Fear is comfortable when you've known nothing else." Isaiah stood. "Then we protect ourselves. Anyone who wants to come, comes immediately. Anyone who hesitates, we wish them well, but we don't wait. We can't afford to. The safety of 500 who want freedom is more important than the uncertainty of 50 who might betray us." There was murmuring, but most heads nodded. They understood the stakes. The next hours were spent assigning people to groups. Isaiah found himself assigned to the Morrison plantation, the one he'd described first, the one he knew best. His group would include Swift Arrow as war chief, 5 Comanche warriors, and 8 freed captives, including Thomas and Sarah. Each group received similar composition, experienced Comanche leadership, local knowledge from freed slaves, and enough fighters to handle expected resistance. The plans were detailed but flexible. They'd approach at dusk, watch the plantations until midnight to learn patterns and positions, then strike simultaneously when the alarm horns blew. The alarm horns were crucial. Each group carried one, made from buffalo horn, with a distinctive 3-note call. When the first group was in position and ready, they'd blow the horn. Others would answer. When all 5 horns had sounded, the attack would begin. This coordination meant no plantation could send warning to others until it was too late. As the meeting broke up, Queen Eye approached Isaiah with a small leather pouch. "For Morrison," she said, "his evening meal. 5 flowers, crushed fine, mixed in his whiskey. He sleeps deep. Maybe he doesn't wake. Your choice." Isaiah took the pouch, feeling its weight. Such a small thing to hold so much power. He thought about Morrison, the man who'd ordered Sarah whipped and her baby sold. The man who'd made Thomas's life a daily torment. The man who'd grown rich on suffering. "I'll make sure his cook knows," Isaiah said. The next 3 days passed in a blur of preparation. The freed captives trained constantly, their initial clumsiness giving way to growing competence. They learned to ride, to fight, to move silently. More importantly, they learned to think of themselves as warriors rather than property. Tahanako spent time with each group, sharing Comanche tactics. He taught them about feints and diversions, about using terrain for advantage, about the importance of decisive action. "When you attack," he said, "you must be committed completely. Hesitation kills. Mercy to your enemies is cruelty to your friends. You understand?" Not everyone could fully embrace this philosophy. Some of the freed captives still struggled with the idea of killing, even killing their oppressors. Isaiah understood. They'd spent lifetimes having violence done to them, being punished for even defending themselves. Asking them to become the dealers of violence, even justified violence, was asking them to fundamentally transform their understanding of themselves. But others took to it with frightening ease. Sarah, who'd lost her child, became the most dedicated student of Swift Arrow's weapons training. Thomas, the gentle giant, practiced strikes on the training targets with such intensity that the other Comanche warriors nodded approval. Ruth learned to ride like she'd been born to it, finding in the movement and power of horses something she'd been denied all her life: control. On the fourth day, Isaiah walked alone to a high point overlooking the canyon. He needed perspective, needed to see the scope of what they'd built in just days. Below, the camp bustled with organized chaos. Children played under the watchful eyes of those who'd stay behind. Women prepared supplies for the journey. Men checked weapons and gear. Comanche and freed captives worked side by side, the initial wariness giving way to a tentative camaraderie born of shared purpose. This was something new in the world, not white and black, not settler and native, but something else, a coalition of the oppressed, united by common cause. Isaiah wondered if it could last beyond the raids, if this brief alliance could become something more permanent. Probably not. The Comanche would return to their traditional territories, the freed slaves would flee toward Mexico or vanish into the wilderness. The Texas Rangers would hunt them all with renewed fury. This moment of unity would scatter like seeds on the wind, but maybe some of those seeds would take root. Red Hawk climbed up to join him, moving with the careful precision of age and old wounds. They stood together in silence for a while, watching the sun descend toward the horizon. "You're thinking about afterward," Red Hawk said. "How did you know?" "Because I'm thinking the same thing. Tomorrow night we attack. Maybe we succeed. Maybe we fail. Either way, this alliance ends. The freed people go their way. My people go ours. The cycle continues." "Does it have to?" Isaiah asked. Red Hawk smiled sadly. "The white men want both our peoples destroyed or enslaved. They want our land, our labor, our submission. But they keep us separated, make us see each other as different threats. If we united, truly united, we might be unstoppable. But," he paused, "but we are different peoples with different needs. The Comanche need open plains and buffalo. Your people need safety and land to farm. These needs may conflict, and yet, for one night, we fight together." "For one night," Red Hawk agreed. "Perhaps that is enough. Perhaps every great change begins with one night of unity." As darkness fell on the fourth day, Tahanako gathered everyone for a final ceremony. In the center of the camp, a large fire burned. Each person participating in the raids was called forward. Quinai marked their faces with war paint. Not traditional Comanche designs, but something new, symbols of both peoples combined. When Isaiah stepped forward, Quinai drew 3 lines across his forehead. "For past, present, future," she said. "You carry all 3 tomorrow. Remember where you came from. Fight in the now. Build what comes next." After everyone was marked, Tahanako spoke. His words were translated by a young warrior who'd learned English at a mission school before escaping. "Tomorrow, we strike at the heart of injustice. We are Comanche warriors and freed captives, but tomorrow we are something more. We are justice itself. The men who enslaved, who stole land, who built wealth on suffering, they will learn that there is always a reckoning. It may be delayed, but it always comes. Some of you will die tomorrow. That is the truth of war. But you will die as free people, fighting for something greater than yourselves. The rest of you will live with scars, physical and spiritual. But you will live free, and your freedom will inspire others. Remember this above all, we fight not for revenge, though vengeance is just. We fight not for violence, though violence is necessary. We fight so that one day neither Comanche nor African need fight at all. We fight so our children may live in a world where chains are only memory and plantations are only ruins. Tonight, sleep, eat, prepare your souls. Tomorrow, we teach Texas that oppression has consequences. The speech was met with a roar of approval, voices raised in English, Comanche, and languages carried from Africa in the memories of stolen ancestors. The sound echoed off the canyon walls, a promise and a threat rolling across the Texas night. Isaiah found himself standing with his raid group, Swift Arrow, Thomas, Sarah, Ruth, and 3 others. They would attack the Morrison plantation tomorrow. They would face armed men, dogs, possibly resistance from slaves too frightened to accept freedom. They might die. "We're really doing this," Thomas said, his voice filled with wonder and terror combined. "We're really doing this," Isaiah confirmed. Sarah touched the whip scars on her back, visible through her thin shirt. "I'm ready. I've been ready since they took my baby. Morrison's going to learn what it feels like to have something precious stolen." Ruth just stared into the fire, her expression unreadable. Finally she said, "My children are out there somewhere, growing up without their mama. I can't get them back, but maybe, just maybe, I can make sure other children don't have to grow up the same way. That's worth dying for." Swift Arrow spoke for the first time that evening. His English was limited, but his words carried weight. "Tomorrow you not slaves, tomorrow you warriors, tomorrow you free. Whatever come after, no one can take that away. You always be able to say, 'One night I stood up, I fought back, I won.'" As the fire burned down and people drifted toward sleep, Isaiah remained awake, staring at the stars. Tomorrow would change everything. 5 plantations would burn, hundreds of people would either die or be liberated, and the world would learn that even the most powerless could become dangerous when they had nothing left to lose. The rust-colored moon rose over Texas, casting long shadows across the canyon. In those shadows, an alliance of the desperate and the determined prepared for war. The 5th day dawned with an unseasonable chill, as if the earth itself anticipated the blood that would soak into it before another sunrise. Isaiah woke from troubled dreams, visions of chains that grew into trees, of fire that spoke with human voices, of his grandfather standing at the edge of a vast darkness saying only, "The hardest part of freedom is choosing what to do with it." The 5 raid groups departed the canyon in staggered intervals, taking different routes to avoid leaving an obvious trail. Isaiah's group left at midday, heading northeast toward the Morrison plantation. Swift Arrow led them along creek beds and through mesquite thickets, avoiding roads and clearings where they might be spotted. They rode in silence, each person lost in private thoughts. Isaiah found himself studying his companions, wondering which would survive the night. Thomas, massive and gentle, who'd finally found an outlet for decades of suppressed rage. Sarah, scarred and burning with single-minded purpose. Ruth, fighting not for her own freedom, but for children she might never see again. By late afternoon, they reached a ridge overlooking Morrison's land. The plantation sprawled below like a kingdom in miniature. The big house with its white columns and broad porch, the overseer's quarters, the cotton gin and storage barns, and furthest from the luxury, the slave quarters, a row of wooden shacks where 40 people lived in conditions barely suitable for livestock. Swift Arrow studied the layout, comparing it to what Isaiah had described days earlier. "How many guards at night?" "2 usually," Isaiah said. "One walks the perimeter of the big house, the other stays near the slave quarters. They rotate every 4 hours. "Dogs?" 3 mean ones. They know the slaves' scents, but they'll bark at strangers." Swift Arrow nodded slowly. "Dogs first, then. Before midnight, Quichnai gave me meat with sleeping medicine. We throw it to dogs. They sleep or die quiet. Then we move." As darkness fell, one of the Comanche warriors crept down toward the plantation, moving with such silence that Isaiah lost sight of him within minutes, despite knowing where he'd gone. An hour later, the warrior returned and spoke rapidly in Comanche. "Dogs are sleeping," Swift Arrow translated. "He also saw into big house. Morrison drinks heavy, like you said. 3 other white men with him playing cards. They have guns nearby, but are, what is word? Not paying attention." "Complacent," Isaiah said. "They think they're safe. They think we're too scared to fight back." Good. Fear is weapon. We take their weapon and use it. As midnight approached, tension coiled in Isaiah's gut. Somewhere out there, 4 other groups were taking positions around 4 other plantations. The plan required coordination, required all 5 groups to be ready simultaneously. If one failed, if one was discovered early, the entire operation could collapse. At 1:45, Swift Arrow pulled out the buffalo horn and blew the 3-note signal. The sound carried across the night, eerily beautiful and utterly alien to this place. They waited, listening. From the southwest, another horn answered. Then another from the north. The 4th signal came from the east. They waited for the 5th, the group targeting the massive Bridger estate, the most dangerous target. Silence stretched. 1 minute. 2. Isaiah's heart hammered. Had something gone wrong? Then finally the 5th horn sounded, distant but clear. "Now," Swift Arrow said. They moved down the ridge in 2 groups. Swift Arrow led the Comanche warriors and Thomas toward the big house. Isaiah took Sarah, Ruth, and the others toward the slave quarters. Their objectives were clear: eliminate resistance, free the enslaved, destroy infrastructure. Isaiah approached the guards stationed near the quarters first. The man was young, probably 20, with his rifle slung carelessly over his shoulder. He was looking toward the big house, where sudden shouting had erupted. The attack on Morrison and his guests had begun. The guard never saw Isaiah coming. The knife Swift Arrow had given him went into the man's back at the kidney, just as he'd been taught. The guard gasped, tried to cry out, but Isaiah's hand clamped over his mouth. They went down together, and Isaiah held on until the struggling stopped. His first kill. It should have felt momentous, but there was no time for reflection. He grabbed the guard's rifle and motioned for the others to follow. The slave quarters were dark, but Isaiah could sense people awake inside, listening to the commotion from the big house. He knocked on the first door, using the pattern his grandfather had taught him. The signal that had once meant an underground railroad conductor was near. A woman opened the door cautiously. Her eyes went wide when she saw Isaiah's face, painted for war, holding a rifle. "Who?" "We're here to free you," Isaiah said. "All of you. But we have to move fast. Wake everyone. Tell them to take nothing but what they can carry. We leave in 10 minutes. "Free? What do you mean, free?" From the big house, gunshots rang out. The woman flinched, and Isaiah saw the familiar fear in her eyes, the instinct to hide, to make herself small, to survive by being invisible. "I mean free," he repeated. "The masters are being dealt with. The overseers are dead or dying. In 10 minutes this plantation burns. You can come with us to real freedom, or you can stay and hope new masters treat you better. Your choice." Understanding dawned in her eyes, followed by terror. Then something else, a spark of hope so fragile it looked painful. She nodded and disappeared into the shack. Within seconds, voices rose in urgent conversation. Isaiah moved to the next building, then the next, repeating his message. Not everyone believed him. Some thought it was a trick, a test of loyalty. Others were paralyzed by fear. But more than half, maybe 30 people, began emerging from their quarters, carrying children, helping elders, grabbing what few possessions they owned. Sarah went to the overseer's house, a small building where the 3 white men who'd made the slaves' lives miserable lived. Through the window, Isaiah saw her moving inside, methodical and efficient. She emerged 5 minutes later, her face spattered with blood, but her expression eerily calm. "They won't hurt anyone again," she said simply. From the big house, flames began to lick at the windows. Thomas appeared in the doorway, silhouetted against the fire. He raised his arm in signal. Their part was done. Morrison and his guests were dead. The house would burn to the ground. "The gin next," Isaiah said, pointing to the cotton gin building. It was the heart of the plantation's wealth, where cotton was processed, where value was created from slave labor. Its destruction would be an economic wound as much as a physical one. Thomas and two Comanche warriors ran to the gin. Minutes later, flames erupted from that building too. The fire spread to the nearby barn where cotton awaited processing. Within minutes, a year's worth of harvest was burning, thousands of dollars of wealth evaporating into smoke. But not everyone from the quarters had joined them. A handful of people, perhaps 8 or 10, had refused to leave, too frightened or too broken to accept the risk of freedom. They huddled together near their shacks, watching the destruction with expressions of abject terror. "We can't force them," Ruth said, seeing Isaiah's frustration. "I know, but it hurts to leave them." An older man approached from the group of holdouts. He was perhaps 60, bent from years in the fields. "Where are you taking people?" he asked. "First to Comanche territory, where the rangers can't easily follow, then south toward Mexico. It's hard travel, maybe 3 weeks, but Mexico doesn't have slavery." The old man nodded slowly. "I'm too old for that journey. These bones wouldn't make a week. But my granddaughter," he gestured toward a young woman holding a small child, "she should go. She should have the chance I never did. Then come with us, even if you can't make it all the way. Come as far as you can." "No." The old man's voice was firm. "I stay. Someone needs to tell what happened here. Someone needs to remember, and someone needs to make sure those who stayed aren't punished too bad when new masters come. But you take my girl, promise me." Isaiah gripped the old man's shoulder. "I promise." The granddaughter came forward reluctantly, crying, but her grandfather pushed her gently toward the group. "Go, live, that's all I ever wanted for you." By now the big house was fully engulfed, flames reaching toward the night sky like clawing hands. The heat was intense, even from a distance. Swift Arrow appeared from the chaos, soot-streaked and grim. "We go. Now, sound carries. Others will see fire, will come to investigate." They moved out, a group of 43 people now. The freed slaves from Morrison's quarters, plus Isaiah's raid group. They headed west, away from the roads, deeper into the rough country where the Comanche could move easily, but pursuing rangers would struggle. Behind them, Morrison's plantation burned like a beacon, and across the Brazos Valley, 4 other beacons were rising into the night, 4 other plantations meeting the same fate. Isaiah climbed a small hill and looked back, seeing the pattern of fires spread across the landscape. 5 plantations, 5 funeral pyres for an institution built on cruelty. The journey back to the canyon would take 3 days. They'd have to move fast, avoid patrols, keep 40 people fed and moving despite exhaustion and fear. But as Isaiah watched the fires burn, he felt something he'd never experienced before. Not quite joy, not quite satisfaction, but a sense of rightness. Of balance restored, as the old stories said. "We did it," Thomas said, appearing beside him. "We actually did it." "This was the easy part," Isaiah replied. "Now we have to get everyone to safety." They traveled through the night, putting distance between themselves and the burning plantations. By dawn, they'd covered 10 miles, moving through country that seemed to have no paths until Swift Arrow revealed them. Game trails, creek beds, natural corridors through the brush. The group was exhausted, but energized by adrenaline and the reality of freedom. Children who'd never known anything but slavery stared at the open sky with wonder. Adults kept looking over their shoulders, unable to believe they weren't being pursued. But Isaiah knew pursuit would come. As soon as word spread, and it was probably spreading already, the Texas Rangers would mobilize. They'd send trackers with dogs, armed posses of angry plantation owners, maybe even army units. The hunt would be massive and merciless. They rested briefly at midday, sheltering in a grove of live oak trees. Swift Arrow approached Isaiah with news from the other groups. All had succeeded. All were retreating toward the canyon. Total count: nearly 500 freed slaves plus the Comanche warriors. It was a migration of liberation, the largest slave rebellion in Texas history. But success brought new problems. 500 people needed water, food, shelter. They needed to be hidden from aerial observation, smoke from fires, dust from movement. They needed medical care for the wounded, and eventually they needed to be led to safety in Mexico, a journey that would test everyone's endurance. "How many dead?" Isaiah asked, dreading the answer. "Our side. 12 Comanche warriors, maybe 15 of the freed people who fought. Could be more. Group still gathering, not everyone accounted for. 27 dead for 500 freed." The mathematics of war were brutal, but in the context of slavery, almost merciful. If those 500 remained enslaved, how many would die over the next year from overwork, disease, punishment? How many children would be born into bondage? How many spirits would be slowly crushed until only obedient shells remained? That evening, they met up with another raid group, the one that had hit the Colton place. The reunion was celebratory, but subdued. Everyone understood the danger was far from over. A woman from the Colton group approached Isaiah. She was perhaps 30, with burn scars on her arms from years working in the plantation kitchen. "Are you Isaiah, the one who speaks Comanche?" "I am. Thank you." The words were simple, but carried the weight of lifetimes. "My mother was sold away when I was 5. My father was whipped to death when I was 10. I never thought I'd live to see this day. Whatever happens next, you gave me this moment, thank you." Isaiah didn't know how to respond to gratitude that pure. He settled for, "We're not safe yet. Thank me when we cross the Rio Grande." "I'll thank you now and then both," she said, smiling. A woman can be grateful twice. By the third day, all 5 groups had reconvened at the canyon. The sight was overwhelming. Hundreds of people crowded into a space designed for dozens. The Comanche camp transformed into a refugee center. Food was scarce. Water was rationed. Tensions ran high as different groups competed for resources. But there was also joy. Families reunited when people discovered relatives they'd been separated from were in other raid groups. Old friendships rekindled between people who'd been sold to different plantations years ago. Children played together, experiencing freedom as their natural state for the first time in their lives. Tahanako called a council that evening. The situation was precarious. Texas Rangers were definitely hunting them. Scouts had reported multiple patrols, and the army was mobilizing units. The canyon couldn't hide them for long, not with this many people. "We must move toward Mexico," Tahanako said. "But 500 people moving together will be seen, tracked, caught. We must split into smaller groups, take different routes, reunite at a rendezvous point near the Rio Grande." Red Hawk spoke. His words translated. "But splitting up means some groups may not survive. Some will be caught, some will be lost. This is reality." Isaiah stood. "Then we need guides for each group. People who know the land, who can navigate by stars, who can find water and avoid patrols. And we need to move fast, within 2 days at most. The longer we stay in one place, the more danger we're all in." The next hours were spent organizing. The 500 freed slaves were divided into 20 groups of 25 each. Each group received a Comanche guide, basic supplies, and a route toward the Rio Grande. The routes varied. Some followed rivers, others cut across open country, some took longer paths that avoided known ranger stations. Isaiah found himself assigned to lead one group, accompanied by Ruth, Thomas, Sarah, and 21 others, mostly from the Morrison and Colton plantations. Their route would take them southwest, skirting San Antonio, then straight south toward the river crossing near Eagle Pass. The night before departure, Tahanako found Isaiah standing watch at the canyon's edge. The chief looked older than he had a week ago, the weight of leadership showing in his eyes. "You did well, blacksmith," Tahanako said. "Your people fought with courage. The Comanche respect courage." "Your warriors made it possible," Isaiah replied. "Without you, we'd still be chained in those fields. Perhaps. Or perhaps you would have found another way eventually. Oppression can only last so long before it breaks. We just helped it break sooner." Tahanako paused. "Red Hawk told me what he said to you. about alliances and seeds. I think he was right. This moment ends tomorrow when you go south and we return to our territories. But the memory remains. And maybe in the future, when both our peoples need allies again, we'll remember what we accomplished together. I'll remember, Isaiah promised, and I'll tell the story to anyone who'll listen, about the night the Comanche and the enslaved burned the plantations of Texas, about how different peoples stood together against common oppression. Tell them also that it was not easy, Tahanako said. Tell them we disagreed. We struggled to understand each other. We came from different worlds with different values. But tell them that when it mattered, we found common ground. That is the important part. Not that we were natural allies, but that we chose to be allies despite our differences. They stood together in silence for a while, two men from vastly different worlds, united briefly by circumstance and choice. "Where will you go after?" Isaiah asked. "West and north, back to our ranges. The rangers will hunt us too, but we know the land and they do not. We'll survive as we always have, by being faster, smarter, and more determined than our enemies. And you, Mexico first, safety. Then, I don't know. Maybe we build something new. A community of free people who remember what bondage cost and refuse to ever submit again. Maybe we help others escape. Maybe we just try to live normal lives and raise children who never know chains." Isaiah smiled bitterly. "I never planned past freedom before. Now I have to figure out what to do with it." "That is the hardest part," Tahanako agreed. "Freedom is not an ending. It is a beginning. And beginnings are always uncertain." Dawn broke over the canyon for the last time. 20 groups prepared to depart, each heading in a different direction, each carrying the hopes of people who'd never dared hope before. Isaiah's group gathered near the southern edge of the camp, checking supplies, saying goodbyes to people they might never see again. Ruth embraced a woman she'd known on the Morrison plantation, both crying openly. Thomas shook hands with Comanche warriors who'd fought beside him, the men clasping forearms in the warrior's grip that transcended language. Sarah stood alone, staring south, her expression distant and determined. Swift Arrow approached Isaiah with a final gift, a knife in a leather sheath, beautifully crafted with Comanche designs. "For the trail," he said in his broken English, "and for remembering." "I'll never forget," Isaiah said, accepting the knife with both hands in the gesture of respect Swift Arrow had taught him. "You and your people gave us more than freedom. You gave us back our dignity." The groups departed in staggered waves throughout the morning. Isaiah's left at midday, when the sun was high and the heat oppressive. They moved in single file, following a narrow trail that wound through mesquite and prickly pear. Their Comanche guide, a young warrior named Little Wolf, led them with confident ease through country that seemed impassable to Isaiah's untrained eye. The first day passed without incident. They covered 15 miles, stopped at a hidden spring Little Wolf knew, refilled water containers, and continued until dusk. Camp was cold, no fires, too risky with patrol searching, and rations were sparse, but people bore the hardship without complaint. This discomfort was chosen, not imposed. That made all the difference. On the second day, they encountered their first patrol. Little Wolf spotted them first, a group of Texas Rangers, maybe 8 men, riding a ridge 2 miles east. He signaled for everyone to freeze, to become part of the landscape. For long minutes, they stood motionless among the brush and rocks, while the Rangers scanned the horizon. Isaiah held his breath, aware that one wrong movement could doom them all. Beside him, a child started to cry. His mother clamped a hand over his mouth, gentle but firm, her eyes wide with terror. The Rangers turned away, continuing north. They'd missed the group by pure chance or divine providence, depending on one's beliefs. "Too close," Little Wolf whispered once the Rangers disappeared. We change route. Go more west, harder terrain, but safer." The new route was brutal. They scrambled over rocky hills, pushed through dense thickets that tore at clothes and skin, forded creeks swollen with recent rain. Two elderly people in the group struggled badly. Thomas ended up carrying one on his back for several miles, refusing to slow down despite the obvious strain. That evening, as they made camp in a narrow canyon, Sarah approached Isaiah. Her face was gaunt from days of hard travel and minimal food, but her eyes burned with purpose. "I've been thinking about what happens when we cross the river," she said. "We'll be in Mexico, yes, legally free, but we'll also be refugees with nothing. No money, no land, no connections. How do we survive?" It was a question Isaiah had been avoiding. The immediate goal, escape Texas, was clear. The long-term future was terrifyingly uncertain. "I've heard there are communities of freed slaves in northern Mexico," he said. "People who crossed years ago, who've built lives. Maybe we can join them, learn from them. And if we can't? If those communities don't exist or won't take us in, then we build our own." The words came out with more confidence than Isaiah felt. "We find land, we work it, we create something new. We survived slavery. We survived the raid and the escape. We can survive whatever comes next." Sarah nodded slowly. "I want to believe that. I want to believe freedom is more than just not being enslaved, that it's actually building something worth living for." She paused. "But I'm scared, Isaiah. For the first time in years, I'm scared not of what will be done to me, but of what I have to do for myself. Does that make sense?" It made perfect sense. Slavery, for all its horrors, provided a terrible certainty. Every day was planned by someone else. Every choice was made by masters. Survival meant obedience, and obedience was the path laid out clearly. Freedom meant choice, responsibility, uncertainty. It meant the possibility of failure, of mistakes, of regret. It meant being fully human, with all the glory and terror that entailed. "You know what I think?" Isaiah said. "I think being scared of freedom means you understand what it really is. It's not just the absence of chains. It's the presence of responsibility for your own life. And that's terrifying because we've never had it before. But terrifying doesn't mean wrong." The third day brought the first real crisis. One of the elderly men, his name was Joseph, and he'd worked Morrison's fields for 40 years, collapsed while climbing a steep hillside. His heart, weakened by decades of brutality, simply gave out. They stopped, gathered around him, but there was nothing to be done. Joseph died with his wife holding his hand, with free air in his lungs, under open sky. His last words were, "I made it out, I got to leave." They couldn't bury him properly, couldn't mark the grave, couldn't even take time to properly mourn. Little Wolf insisted they keep moving. Patrols were everywhere, and stationary groups were vulnerable, so they covered Joseph's body with rocks, said quick prayers, and continued south, carrying grief and gratitude in equal measure. That night, Ruth spoke about what Joseph's death meant. He was enslaved for 40 years. 40 years of serving people who saw him as property, and he died free, heading toward a new life. Is that tragedy or triumph? "Both," Thomas said quietly. "Life doesn't give us clean stories. Joseph's death is sad, but his freedom was real. He got to choose to run, choose to risk everything, choose to die free rather than live enslaved. That choice, that's what they could never give him. That's what he finally took for himself." And the days blurred together, walking, hiding, rationing food and water, dealing with injuries and exhaustion. They passed burned homesteads, evidence of Comanche raids or settler violence, impossible to tell which. They avoided towns and ranches, moving through country that seemed empty, but never quite was. Twice more they spotted patrols and had to hide. Once a group of armed men rode so close that Isaiah could hear their conversation, brutal speculation about what they'd do when they caught the runaways. On the 8th day, Little Wolf announced they were 2 days from the Rio Grande. The group's spirits lifted despite the exhaustion. Mexico, safety, real freedom, not just stolen moments between hunters. But that afternoon, their luck ran out. They were crossing an open stretch. Unavoidable, Little Wolf said, the only route through without adding days to the journey, when shots rang out. A patrol had spotted them from a distant ridge and gave chase. "Run!" Little Wolf shouted, pointing toward a tree line a half-mile away. "Into the trees! Scatter if you have to!" The group broke into panicked flight. More shots echoed across the plain. Isaiah saw a woman go down, clutching her leg. Thomas veered toward her, scooped her up without breaking stride, and kept running. Little Wolf and Isaiah turned to face the patrol, both armed with rifles taken from the plantation raid. It was suicide, but necessary. Someone had to slow the pursuers, or everyone would be caught. "Get them to Mexico," Little Wolf said. His English had improved over the journey, bonding through hardship, erasing language barriers. "I stay. Slow them down." "I'll stay with you," Isaiah said. "No, you are leader. They need you. I am warrior. This is my purpose." Little Wolf smiled, and there was joy in it, the joy of a man facing death on his own terms. "Go, blacksmith. Tell story of Comanche and freed slaves who stood together. That matters more than one warrior's life." Isaiah wanted to argue, but more shots rang out, closer now. He gripped Little Wolf's shoulder once, acknowledgement, respect, gratitude, then turned and ran after his group. Behind him, Little Wolf's rifle began firing in steady, aimed shots. The patrol's pursuit slowed, their attention diverted by the threat. It bought precious minutes. Isaiah reached the tree line and looked back. Little Wolf was a lone figure on the plain, reloading, firing again. The patrol had dismounted, taking cover, returning fire. It was an unequal fight, with only one possible outcome, but Little Wolf had given them time. The group plunged deeper into the trees, moving fast, leaving the sound of gunfire behind. They didn't stop running until nightfall, covering miles in a desperate push for distance. When they finally collapsed, too exhausted to go further, they took count. 23 remained of the original 25. The woman Thomas had carried, her leg wound wasn't fatal, but she couldn't walk. And Little Wolf was gone, sacrificed himself to save people he'd known for barely 2 weeks. "We make it count," Sarah said fiercely, her voice cutting through the grief and shock. "We make it to Mexico. We survive. We build lives worth living, because if we don't, then his death, then all the deaths, they don't mean anything." "They already mean something," Ruth countered. "They mean someone valued our freedom more than their own life. That's not nothing, that's everything." The next 2 days were a blur of movement and fear. Without Little Wolf's guidance, they relied on Isaiah's imperfect sense of direction, following the sun by day and stars by night, heading always south. They were lost, injured, running out of food and water. But they kept moving because stopping meant capture or death. On the 10th day they saw it, a line of green cutting through the brown landscape, trees that meant water, the Rio Grande. They approached cautiously, expecting patrols at the crossing points. But fate, which had been cruel so often, granted one mercy. They found a quiet stretch of river, shallow enough to wade, with no rangers in sight. "That's it," Isaiah said, staring at the water. "That's Mexico. That's freedom." For a long moment, nobody moved. After everything they'd endured, the raid, the flight, the deaths, the sacrifice, crossing this final barrier seemed almost anticlimactic. Just step into water, wade across, emerge on the other side legally free. But it wasn't anticlimactic. It was profound in its simplicity. Freedom wasn't always a dramatic moment. Sometimes it was just crossing a river. Ruth went first, wading into the current with her dress hiked up, laughing and crying at once. Others followed, children splashing, adults moving with quiet dignity, everyone understanding the significance. Isaiah crossed last, turning to look back at Texas one final time. Somewhere behind them, patrols still hunted. Somewhere, the burned plantations smoldered. Somewhere, Little Wolf's body lay on a plain, unmarked and unmourned by anyone but those he'd saved. Thank you, Isaiah whispered to the land, to the dead, to the unlikely alliance that had made this moment possible. Then he stepped into the Rio Grande and waded toward freedom. The Mexican village of San Carlos was small, maybe 300 people, most of them Mexican farmers with a scattering of Tejano families who'd fled Anglo violence. When Isaiah's group stumbled into the plaza, ragged and exhausted, the villagers' first instinct was alarm. 23 desperate people, some wounded, all clearly running from something, were not a welcome sight in any community. But then an old man stepped forward. His name was Miguel, and he'd helped escaped slaves before. He took one look at the group, saw the whip scars and brands that marked them as fugitives from slavery, and made a decision. "You are safe here," he said in accented English. "The Mexican government does not return runaways. You are free people now. Come, we will find you food and shelter." The relief was overwhelming. Several people collapsed, the adrenaline that had kept them moving for 10 days finally draining away. Ruth sobbed openly, her body shaking with release. Thomas sat down in the dirt and put his head in his hands, unable to speak. Sarah approached Isaiah, her expression complex, joy mixed with something harder. "We made it," she said. 14 of us died to get here, but we made it." 13, Isaiah corrected gently. "Joseph died free, remember? He made it out. He counts as success, not failure." "Does Little Wolf count as success?" "He died in Texas soil, buying us time." "Yes," Isaiah said firmly. "He died free, fighting for something he believed in. That's success in any measure that matters." Over the following days, the village integrated the refugees with surprising grace. Families shared homes, provided food and clothing, helped treat wounds and illnesses. Miguel explained that San Carlos had become a known destination for escaped slaves. The villagers understood their role as sanctuary, took pride in it even. "Many people pass through here," Miguel told Isaiah. "Some stay, some move deeper into Mexico. There are communities of freed slaves in Coahuila, in Tamaulipas. You have options." But Isaiah's mind wasn't on immediate survival anymore. Now that the desperate flight was over, he found himself thinking about what came next. They'd achieved freedom, but freedom without purpose was just existence. They needed something to build toward, something to make the sacrifices meaningful. He called a meeting of the group on their 5th day in San Carlos. They gathered in the village church, sitting on simple wooden benches, still adjusting to the reality that they could meet publicly without fear. "We need to decide what we do now," Isaiah began. "We're in Mexico, we're legally free. But we're also homeless, jobless refugees with no resources. We have choices to make." Thomas spoke first. "Some of the villagers have offered work, farm labor, construction, domestic service, paid work, not slavery. I'm thinking I'll take one of those offers, stay here at least for a while." Others nodded. Several were leaning toward remaining in San Carlos, integrating into this community that had welcomed them. It made sense, especially for the elderly and the wounded. But Ruth had different ideas. "I need to go back." The words hung in the air, shocking in their impossibility. "Go back?" Sarah said. "To Texas? Are you insane?" "Not to stay enslaved. But my children are there. 3 babies I haven't seen in months. I can't just abandon them, can't just build a new life knowing they're still suffering. I have to try to get them out." "That's suicide," someone said. "The Rangers are looking for all of us. You go back, you'll be caught, sold south, probably killed." "Maybe," Ruth said, "probably. But I have to try. I can't be free while my children are enslaved. It would be a lie." Isaiah understood. He'd been thinking the same thoughts about the people left behind, the hundreds still enslaved on other plantations, the ones who'd been too scared to run, the families split across the South. How could they call this success when so many remained in chains? "I'm going back too," he said, surprising himself with the certainty in his voice. "Not to San Carlos or to other villages. Back to Texas, back to the plantations, to help others escape." The room erupted in argument. Some called him crazy. Others said he'd throw away the freedom they'd fought so hard for. But Sarah, quiet until now, spoke up. "I'll go with you. My baby is gone. Sold so far away I'll never find him. But there are other babies, other children who need rescuing. If we don't do it, who will?" By the end of the meeting, a plan had emerged. Most of the group would remain in San Carlos or move to other Mexican communities, building new lives in safety. But 5 people, Isaiah, Ruth, Sarah, Thomas, and a young man named Daniel, would return to Texas, not to live, but to operate, to become what the plantation owners feared most: organized resistance, helping slaves escape, sabotaging the institution from within. Miguel, when he heard the plan, was both admiring and worried. "You understand you probably die doing this? The rangers, the slave catchers, they kill people like you on sight." "We understand," Isaiah said. "But we also understand something else. Those raids freed 500 people. That's 500 lives changed. But Texas has thousands of enslaved people. If we can help even 50 more escape, that's 50 more families reunited, 50 more people living in freedom. That's worth the risk." Over the next weeks they prepared. Miguel connected them with the Underground Railroad, a loose network of abolitionists, free blacks, sympathetic Mexicans, and Tejanos who helped slaves escape. The network provided resources, safe houses, routes, and critical intelligence about plantation locations and patrol patterns. They learned about other resistance efforts, small groups operating throughout the South, helping people escape 1 or 2 at a time. They weren't alone in this fight, but they brought something unique: knowledge of how to attack the institution directly, how to organize raids, how to work with unlikely allies. News from Texas filtered into San Carlos through the network. The 5 plantation burnings had sparked panic among slave owners. Some were selling their land and moving east, afraid they'd be next. The Texas Rangers had launched a massive manhunt, but found little. Most of the escaped slaves had successfully reached Mexico or disappeared into Comanche territory. But the news also brought pain. The Comanche alliance had fractured. Some bands, inspired by the raids, had intensified their resistance. Others, fearing the increased military response, had sued for peace. The unified front that had made the raids possible no longer existed. Little Wolf's death was confirmed. His body had been found. And in a gesture Isaiah found both touching and enraging, some rangers had buried him with honor, recognizing his warrior's courage even as they hunted his allies. 3 months after arriving in San Carlos, Isaiah's small group prepared to leave. They had horses now, weapons, knowledge, and connections. They had transformed from desperate refugees into something new: freedom fighters operating in the shadows, targeting the institution that had tormented them. The night before departure, Miguel found Isaiah standing alone, staring north toward the land they'd fled. "You know you might never return here," Miguel said. "You go back into danger, you might die there. No one would blame you for staying in Mexico, for living the freedom you earned." "I know," Isaiah replied. "But I keep thinking about something Tahanaco said. He said freedom isn't an ending, it's a beginning. Well, my beginning can't be about just saving myself. It has to be about helping others find their own beginnings." "You're a good man, Isaiah. A brave man, but also maybe a stubborn, foolish man." Miguel smiled to soften the words. "I will pray for you, and I will keep helping those you send south. This is my role, sanctuary. Your role is different, more dangerous, but just as necessary." They left at dawn, riding north toward a land that wanted them dead. But they rode anyway, because freedom meant nothing if it wasn't shared. Because justice delayed was justice denied. Because the fires they'd lit 3 months ago needed to keep burning. For the next year, they operated along the Texas-Mexico border. They helped small groups escape, 5 people here, 10 there. They sabotaged plantations through indirect means, poisoned livestock, damaged equipment, spread disease through water supplies. They created fear among slave owners, the constant knowledge that resistance existed, that the enslaved weren't passive victims. They lost people. Daniel was caught after 6 months and hanged publicly as a warning. Ruth made it back to East Texas, but was ambushed trying to rescue her children. She killed 2 slave catchers before dying of her wounds, but she got her oldest daughter out, got her to the network, got her to safety. The daughter made it to San Carlos, where Miguel himself delivered the news to Isaiah. But they also saved people. 50 escapes that first year became 100 the second. The network grew, adding new operatives, new routes, new methods. Isaiah's name became known, whispered in slave quarters as a symbol of hope, cursed in plantation houses as a terrorist and criminal. Texas authorities put a price on his head, $5,000, an enormous sum. Wanted posters appeared in every town, showing a sketch based on witness descriptions. Isaiah the Liberator, some called him, the Brazos Devil. Others said he was neither. He was just a blacksmith who'd learned to speak Comanche, who'd been in the right place at the right moment, who'd seized an opportunity and refused to let it go. He was just a man trying to tip the scales of justice a little bit closer to balance. 3 years after the raids, Isaiah found himself in San Carlos again, recovering from an injury, a bullet wound from a patrol encounter that had nearly killed him. As he healed, he began writing, documenting the story of the raids, the alliance, the escape. Why? Sarah asked. She'd stayed with him through everything, had become his closest friend and fiercest ally. Why write it down? It could be used against us. Because history is written by those who win, Isaiah said, and right now the slavers are winning the larger war, even if we win individual battles. Our story needs to be told, needs to be preserved. One day, slavery will end. When it does, people need to know we resisted, that we fought back, that we weren't passive victims waiting for white saviors. They need to know about the Comanche who stood with us, about Little Wolf who died for strangers, about Ruth who died trying to save her children. He wrote for weeks, filling pages with the story of that summer in 1844. The terror and hope, the violence and grace, the unlikely alliance between 2 oppressed peoples. When he finished, he gave copies to Miguel to hide, to preserve, to someday share when it was safe. The document ended with these words. They called it rebellion. History will call it impossible, but the earth called it balance restored. We were slaves who became warriors, prisoners who became free. We did not do it alone. We could never have done it alone. We did it with allies who had every reason to see us as enemies, but chose instead to see us as fellow sufferers under tyranny. The plantations of the Brazos Valley burned that night in 1844, but more than buildings burned. The myth of slavery's permanence burned. The illusion of slave docility burned. The presumption that different oppressed peoples cannot unite burned. We are still hunted. We are still in danger. Many of us are dead, but we are not defeated. Every person we help escape is a victory. Every plantation we sabotage is a message. Every day we remain free is an act of defiance. They will try to erase this story. They will say it never happened, or if it did, that it was barbarism, savagery, terrorism. But we know the truth. The Comanche warriors know the truth. The freed slaves living in Mexico know the truth. We are not your property. We are the storm you made, and storms, once started, cannot be easily stopped. To those who read this in some future time, know that we fought. Know that we resisted. Know that freedom, real freedom, is never given. It must be taken, held, defended and shared. The alliance was brutal because slavery was brutal. The alliance was necessary because oppression was universal. The alliance was possible because humanity at its core recognizes injustice and sometimes, not always, but sometimes, chooses to stand against it. Remember us. Remember little Wolf. Remember Ruth. Remember all who died so that others might live in freedom. And if you face your own chains, whatever form they take, remember, you are not alone. Alliance is always possible. Resistance is always justified. Freedom is always worth the fight. We are Isaiah, Sarah, Thomas, and the unnamed hundreds who stood with us. We are the Comanche warriors who defied easy categories of enemy and ally. We are the brutal alliance, and our story doesn't end here. It continues in every act of resistance, every moment of solidarity, every time oppressed peoples recognize their common cause. The fires are still burning, and they will burn until every chain is broken, every plantation is dust, and every human being can say with certainty, "I am free." Isaiah finished the last sentence as dawn broke over San Carlos. He was 35 years old, looked 50 from the hard living. He had scars on his wrists from the chains he'd worn for most of his life. He had new scars from bullets and knives, from 3 years of guerrilla warfare against an institution that refused to die peacefully. But he was free. And more importantly, he'd helped hundreds of others find freedom. Sarah found him sitting outside the church, the manuscript pages stacked beside him. "Is it done?" "It's done. The story is written. Now it just needs to survive. We all just need to survive," she said, sitting beside him. "How much longer can we keep doing this? How many more years of running, hiding, fighting, until slavery ends, or until we die, whichever comes first? That's not much of a retirement plan." Isaiah laughed, a rare sound these days. "I had a retirement plan once, work Morrison's forge until my back gave out, die in some shack, be buried in an unmarked grave behind the quarters. This plan might be dangerous, but at least it's interesting." And they sat in comfortable silence as the village woke around them. Children played in the plaza, women carried water from the well, men prepared for field work. Normal life, the kind Isaiah had never known as a slave. "Do you regret it?" Sarah asked. "Sometimes I wonder if we should have just stayed here, built normal lives. We've sacrificed so much, lost so many friends. For what? Slavery still exists. We've barely made a dent. We've made more than a dent. We've made a statement. We've shown it can be fought, that the enslaved aren't helpless, that allies can be found in unexpected places, and we've saved hundreds of lives. That's not nothing, Sarah. That's everything to those hundreds." Miguel approached, interrupting the conversation. "Isaiah, there is someone here to see you, a Comanche rider. He says he has a message from Tahanaco." Isaiah's heart jumped. He hadn't heard from the Comanche chief since the raids 3 years ago. He stood, following Miguel to where a young warrior waited. The message was simple but profound. Tahanaco wanted to meet, to discuss another alliance. The Texas Rangers had intensified their campaign against the Comanche. They'd massacred entire bands, taken captives, forced some groups onto reservations. Tahanaco believed it was time to renew the partnership. Coordinated strikes against mutual enemies, shared intelligence, united resistance. "Tell your chief I will come," Isaiah said. "Tell him the alliance endures. Tell him Little Wolf's sacrifice is not forgotten." After the messenger left, Sarah stared at Isaiah. "You're actually considering this? Another set of raids? More violence? We barely survived last time." "I'm not just considering it. I'm committed to it because Tahanako's right. We're stronger together than apart. The Rangers want to destroy the Comanche and recapture escaped slaves. Those are connected fights. We should fight them together." Over the next months, plans formed for new operations, not as dramatic as the 5 plantation raids, but strategic, targeted, designed to hurt the institution of slavery and the forces protecting it. And always, always, the escapes continued. The quiet work of liberation, one family at a time. The wanted posters multiplied. The price on Isaiah's head rose to $10,000. Songs were written about him in slave quarters across the South, some accurate, most wildly exaggerated, all serving the same purpose: hope. The knowledge that resistance existed, that freedom was possible, that someone was fighting. Years passed. The alliance between freed slaves and Comanche warriors became legend. Some said it never really happened, that it was myth created by abolitionists. Others swore they'd been there, had fought in the raids, though the numbers claiming involvement far exceeded the actual participants. The Civil War came, and with it, the end of slavery. Isaiah lived to see it, barely. He was 49 years old when Lee surrendered, a lifetime of struggle etched into his face and body. He returned to San Carlos one final time, finding Miguel still alive, still helping refugees, still preserving stories. "We won," Miguel said, embracing Isaiah. "After everything, after all the death and suffering, we won." "We survived," Isaiah corrected. "Winning is what comes next. Building a world where this never happens again. That's the real fight." He lived 5 more years, teaching young freed people about their history, about the night the Comanche and the slaves stood together, about resistance and alliance and the price of freedom. When he died in 1870, he was buried in San Carlos with full honors, his grave marked with 2 symbols, the broken chains of liberation and the Comanche symbol for warrior. The manuscript he'd written was preserved, passed down through generations, eventually published in the early 1900s, when enough time had passed that the truth could be told without endangering survivors. Historians debated its accuracy. Some claimed it exaggerated, others that it understated the violence. But those who'd been there, the dwindling number of survivors and their descendants, knew it was true. The brutal alliance had happened, the plantations had burned, the impossible had occurred. And somewhere in the Brazos Valley, if you looked carefully, you could still find the marks. Scorched earth where cotton gins once stood, overgrown foundations of big houses, unmarked graves of overseers and masters who'd learned too late that cruelty has consequences. The land remembered, the wind remembered, and the descendants of those who'd fought, both Comanche and African, remembered. They told the story to their children, who told it to theirs, an oral history of resistance that refused to die. In the end, that was Isaiah's real victory. Not the raids themselves, not the hundreds freed, but the story. The proof that oppressed peoples could unite, could fight back, could win. The knowledge that no institution, no matter how powerful, is permanent when confronted with determined resistance. They called it rebellion. History called it impossible. But the earth called it balance restored. And on certain nights, when the wind howls across the Texas plains, some say you can still hear the drums, a reminder that one night in 1844, the enslaved and the native sons of the earth burned the world's chains together. The alliance was brutal. The alliance was necessary. The alliance was possible, and in being possible, it changed everything.
They say just forget. Move on like it's easy. But forgetting you feels like remembering someone I've never seen. I've been trying to erase you from the places in my mind, but the harder that I fight it, the more you're hard to leave behind. Every memory keeps slipping through the cracks I try to close, like a face I should remember, but somehow never know. Forgetting you feels impossible, like chasing something I can't hold, like trying to remember someone that I've never even known. I keep reaching through the silence for a past I can't undo, 'cause letting go of what like losing something true. Every moment turns to fragments, every thought just fades to blue. Like I'm searching for a feeling that still only leads to you. Forgetting you feels impossible, like chasing something I can't hold. Like trying to remember someone that I've never even known. I keep reaching through the silence for a past I can't undo. 'Cause letting go of what we had feels like losing something true. But now every empty moment still reminds me what is real. Forgetting you feels impossible, like chasing something I can't hold. Like trying to remember someone that I've never even known. I keep reaching through the silence for a past I can't undo. 'Cause letting go of what we had feels like losing something true. I'm freezing, I'm bleeding, slowly fading away. But don't worry, I'm fine. The cold has settled in my heartbeat, like winter living in my veins. Every breath feels numb and fragile, every smile just hides the pain. I'm breaking quietly in silence, falling slow without a sound. Yet I keep saying I'm okay, while my world burns to the ground. I'm frozen here, I'm bleeding slowly, dying piece by piece inside. But I still whisper, it's alright, just to keep you from goodbye. I'm shattered, love, but don't you worry, I'll pretend till my last breath. Even while my soul is fading, I'll say everything's okay. Maybe pain just learned to live here, maybe sorrow feels like home. So I wear my wounds like armor and survive them all alone. I'm frozen here, I'm bleeding slowly, dying piece by piece inside. But I still whisper, it's alright, just to keep you from goodbye. I'm shattered, love, but don't you worry, I'll pretend till my last breath. Even while my soul is fading, I'll say everything's okay. If you ever see me smiling, know it's just my last defense. 'Cause sometimes love means hiding how much you're suffering. No, I'm frozen here, I'm bleeding slowly, dying piece by piece inside. But I still whisper, it's alright, just to keep you from goodbye. I'm shattered, love, but don't you worry, I'll pretend till my last breath. Even while my soul is fading, I'll say everything's okay. It's okay.